Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Cleveland Heights City Council Finance Committee meeting for February 23rd, 2026 at 6 p.m. I'd like to call the roll. I'm Chair Jim Posh. We have Vice Chair Gail Larson.
Here.
We have member Sarah Stone.
Here.
Excellent. We have a quorum. We have other council members. We have Councilmember Cobb, Councilmember Jessica Cohn. We have Councilmember Mr. Kuda. I don't think sitting at the head of the table. I think I would have seen you. We have Councilmember Joe Foy, Mayor Jim Petrus. We have Director Joe Brodinski, Assistant Director Russian Caldwell. Sorry, I'm butchering people's names today. And we have City Administrator Michael Reese in attendance. We have a
Councilman Posh, also Tiffany.
Tiffany, I'm sorry, Tiffany. You're sitting right there. We have a full agenda this evening, and I'd like to start with introducing Director Brodinski. I'm probably butchering your name, and I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
You're welcome. You've come to join us for the first time.
Yeah.
And you have your staff and a financial report.
And for item 2, you're talking about the latest financials and the audit staff or the audit status. Everything that the city and the auditors need to do for the 23 audit has been completed. We're just waiting for the last final review from the state auditor's office. None of us are anticipating any issues, so they should be releasing it within the week. And we have maybe 3 or 4 items that we are still working with our auditors from Zupka and Associates to get everything we need for the 2024 audit. We had a meeting with our financial preparers who told us everything that they had outstanding. We are in the process of getting that all compiled to them, and then we can be able to roll into the 25 audit.
Okay.
And as far as the financials, this being my first meeting, I'll end up turning it over to Rashawn because she's had flavor going through it, and then obviously going forward, I most certainly will be able to handle it.
All right, perfect. So thank you, Director Brodinski. As he mentioned, I'll be walking you all through the January 2026 financials. If you, just to start out, I wanted to give you all a heads up that this is pared down from the 19 pages or so that we normally present. A couple reasons for that. One, we wanted to present, it's the top of the year, not a lot of activity in terms of month over month, et cetera, to compare. And the other reason is that we wanted to present to you at a higher level to make it more manageable when you're reviewing. We plan to incorporate some of the detail back into the reports for our quarterly review. So take a look at it, let us know what you think, we're open to suggestions. All right, so on page 2, we'll begin with our all funds revenue. For all funds on the revenue side, January's revenue was $5.6 million. This is down $443,000 from January 2025. That's due to a couple of reasons. It's due to a decrease in our grant revenues by $567,000. Of course, grant revenues are kind of cyclical, so it's hard to kind of compare year over year. And our interest earnings, which decreased by $304,000, which is mainly due to a spend down in ARPA funds, and also we had some federal interest rate cuts throughout the year. These decreases were offset by increases in our state shared levy revenue. The city received about a couple $100,000 the middle of January in adult cannabis taxes. That was kind of unexpected, and that was from August 2024 through November 2025. That remittance came over at the end or middle of the month, and we also received another $10,000 to $12,000 afterwards. So it was 2 different payments that we received for that. So that helped offset the decrease. We also received an additional $171,000 in fees, licenses, and permit revenue. And so we are down $443K net. For all funds on the expenditure side, January 2026 expenditures were $8.4 million. Our capital expenditures decreased by $636,000. Personal service expenditures decreased by $259,000, and the other than personnel services increased by $838,000. The net effect is that we're down $57,000 year over year.
Director Caldwell, do you have an idea or a feeling, an impression as to why the personal services decreased? Because we're looking at those during the budget season, we were, wanted to make sure we had a handle on the increases that were happening due to the wage and salary study and to the union contracts, et cetera, and COLA. So it's interesting to me.
Yeah, and so we, just transparency, we were able to compile our report today, so I wanted to do some digging into that because that did seem odd to me. So I can take a look at it and send
Thank
something
you.
out about that.
Thank
Yeah.
Probably also unfilled positions.
Right,
Because
yeah.
last year that we had a number of positions,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
right now we're
Yeah.
not filling that.
Okay, moving on to page 3, our unencumbered fund balance for all funds, cash is down 17.5 million from 82 million to 65 million year over year. This is mainly due to a spend down in our ARPA funds, which decreased from 25 million at the top of 2025 to 6.6 million at the end of the year.
And if I could, just to add there, as a reminder for everyone, the ARPA funds have to be spent by the end of this year. So the remainder of that $38 million that we received from the federal government will be used up before the end of the year.
Okay, over to our general fund revenues. For January, our revenues came in at $4.3 million. This was an increase of $101,000 or 2.4% compared to January of last year. As I mentioned earlier, for the all funds, interest earnings decreased in the general fund by $304,000, but they were offset by the state taxes, which was that cannabis taxes, that remittance that we received from the state, as well as fees, licenses, and permits were up $161,000. Similar to all funds, the general fund also saw an increase on the expenditure side as January's expenditures were up $745,000 to $5.1 million or 17% year over year. The main driver is that the other than personal services increased by $972,000, capital increased by $13,000, both of which were offset by personal services, which decreased by $240,000. Year over year, the general fund unencumbered fund balance decreased by $11 million.
I mean, we talked at your interview about that you would look at what is the balance that we need to maintain in our unencumbered general fund
Sure.
for safety purposes, for
Sure.
credit rating, et cetera. So when you get a chance, I know you just started, but I really want to have some kind of figure that we can use as a conceptual
Right,
target.
off the top of my head without fine tuning it.
Yeah.
20 to 30%. I
So
would
that
say.
would be,
And we're right in there now.
We're at about 26%. And then, so that's an overview. Everything else is just some of the charts and detail. We got the fund balance report that I spoke to, the unencumbered fund cash report, and some more detail behind the revenues and expenditures.
sure. I know it's early, I know it's only January,
Yes.
but I like to look at the balances in the unencumbered column that are negative at this point.
Okay,
So just a material one, it's 103,338, and that's the ARPA account. Why would that be negative? Local fiscal recovery is ARPA, correct?
yes, and that was zero at the end of the year. That has to be some type of roll-up error. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
zero at the end of the year, so.
Right, because it was part of the that transaction that you asked us to, the transfers that you asked us
Yes,
to incorporate.
yes.
So if you'd look at that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, chances are what's gonna happen is the encumbrance line of what, 6.6 million? We will be backing off of the 103, cause you're right, we shouldn't go negative.
Yeah. it should
So
be-
really, we have too much encumbrances.
Thank you.
And so that's high level, the report, if you all wanna take a look, and if you have any other questions.
Will you be posting these fairly soon?
Yes.
Oh, by the way, Chair, I like what you're doing on the mayor's website for the financial reports. You've got monthly, the 2 monthlies and then the quarterly,
Mhm.
the 2 monthlies and the quarterly. It works very well, so thank you.
Great, great.
Thank you so much.
In terms,
No, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna ask in terms of the level of detail, is this good for you all monthly or? So we had previously we had 19 pages, we're down to about 9. A lot of it was duplication and we just wanted to make it easier for you all to review and go through month over month.
Or take the next couple of weeks and get back with any feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
Councilman
My
Pash.
my thought would be, how can we compare this against budget? That's the real big issue. In January, it's almost harder, if not impossible, to really do that. But if adding additional level of detail, that's where I would love to see this.
Okay,
And then get assurances, some of the other reports that you normally do, like the bank reconciliation statements and stuff like
Okay.
that are being done. And, we noticed that there was a long period of time when the city wasn't doing those kind of like reports that were sort of best practices. But just getting a sense of, that work is getting done,
mhm.
so.
So, yes, so we did reconcile through the end of December, and so that there was a period of time that we were getting caught up. We are caught up through December with our bank recs. Our accountant's working on January, and so that is being done. And in terms of just the monthly, so our revenues and expenditures were roughly 62, budget on the general fund side, that's roughly 5.1 million. So we're trending under for the revenue by about 800,000 and right at 5.1 for the expenses.
I was gonna ask about comparison to budget, but then also just, and this may not be every month, but if there's a discrepancy that is unexpected
Mhm.
or a variation, the more details you come with, I think would alleviate the need for follow-up after.
Okay.
Cause I,
And you're looking for info comparing the year-to-date budget versus the actual?
yes, and I was just echoing what Councilman Pash requested, yeah.
Part of the problem with that is in certain categories that has more valid information on personnel, et cetera. But the city doesn't spend money 1/12, 2/12, 3/12, 4/12. So it is gonna be skewed. If you start comparing it to revenues, we don't receive revenues on 12 each month. The best example to that would be property taxes. By the end of March, we will have our first half property taxes. Yet it's gonna look like we're way over budget because we don't have the 4th, 5th, and 6th in. So at the end of March, it's gonna look really good. And then in April, it's gonna get less, May less, June less, cause we'll be putting those budget numbers in, but we have no more actual for the first half of the year. But yeah, certain categories work well that way. Other categories, when you're factoring in year-end encumbrances that are carrying over, especially at the beginning of the year, or property taxes, will stick out. I'm also gonna be looking on creating a spreadsheet for income tax that will be able to tell us, because once again, income tax does not come in 112, 212, to get a better grip on that.
Right. Yes, Mary.
No, I was just agreeing with what you said.
I just wanted to maybe, sorry,
no,
Kirby, you could do that projection quarterly. Maybe that look might happen, be a little bit more accurate if it's not, you would
For
try and track
property
it.
taxes, sure,
You're
yes,
trying to
I
track
agree.
it month to month to month.
I could, on a related note, we have received a number of large unexpected expenses. And so we are going through the budget to identify opportunities where we might be able to realize some savings. So the finance department is going to start meeting with individual directors so that we could identify some areas. It would be great if it's the case that we can add some money back into the budget later in the year, but rather than waiting until September, for example, whenever 75% of the allocated funds have already been used, it's easier for us to do this now and maybe find something. So we could provide a better update in the future on that.
Would there be an appropriate time where we could talk about what some of those items are?
I can share a couple of them right now. So for example, in our agreement with Flaherty and Collins, we were responsible for covering the expenses of the Cedar Lee parking garage during the construction. And now that that's completed, they provide an invoice to us for $400,000 that was not in the budget. Also, we were charging out of county property owners a higher registration fee here in the city than we were for those inside of Cuyahoga County, and there was a judgment against the city for $340,000 in that case, plus about $100,000 in lawyers' fees. So that's close to $500,000. So there are a number of things like this that were unexpected that we are trying to make room for in the budget.
That brings to mind the question, like, I know we have a general fund, like an emergency fund and reserves, but do we have or should we have a litigation fund, like a fund that is sitting? I mean, we obviously get sued as a city.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, finance is gonna work close with law. I'm not big in setting up funds if we could track them in other places. But it'll be more detail as we sit down throughout the budget process with the law department and potentially appropriate for that, budget for that.
Right, that's exactly.
And to the mayor's point, we think we're gonna lose that case, so we put money aside. If we win that case, we could just reduce the appropriations.
Correct. Or
It'll
move
be
it.
better going into next year than it was this year.
So I want to do everything that I can to work within the budget so that we don't have to touch the reserves. But I can, like I said, at a future time, provide a better update. I'm sorry, I should have looked at the agenda and thought about identifying some of these items in advance, but we're actively working on that now.
I think that's fine. And if there's gonna be a meeting like this every month. So if we could just get a sense of kind of what you're dealing with and how we could help.
Sure.
Address those things. I mean, would it be helpful if we would, as a council, approve some budget adjustments at this point?
No, I don't
We're
think that it's
still looking for
necessary.
savings.
Okay,
I mean, once we have exhausted where we think we have the savings, then we certainly will have that discussion with council.
fair enough.
Sure. So Mayor, are you looking for cuts that come out of the general fund? Because the all funds account is pretty flush and that wouldn't really affect the balance, the unencumbered balance, whereas expenditures that come out of the general fund would directly affect that. I mean, are you just looking at everywhere?
I'm just trying to stay within our current budget. I don't want to go, okay.
If an unanticipated expenditure like the mayor just brought up is coming out of Fund X, we will be looking for savings only in Fund X. And potentially as a backup if necessarily the general fund via transfer. If the expenditures are coming out of the general fund, we'll only be looking in the general fund for those savings.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Any other conversations about the latest financials and the audit status. Moving on to the next item, an update from the administrative, the legislation that we had that requires the reporting of contracts that exceed $750,000. This has kind of been an ongoing monthly, just looking for an update to see how we as a city are digesting that piece of legislation.
So we now have recurring Wednesday meetings, Thursday meetings, where we are working on this issue. So the meetings have two purposes. So one is to get caught up on those contracts that need to go onto the website. John and Finance and Loretta have been chipping away at a few every week. One of the things that we learned is that pieces and parts of contracts are across the city, and so they're having to pull all of that together for contracts between 7,500 and 50,000. We are simultaneously working on creating a new process to put in place so that we don't have to do this going forward, so that the contracts end up in a repository so that they can then be passed along to law for redaction and then posted on the website more easily. So they continue to chip away at that. And I anticipate that it won't be too much longer before the outstanding contracts are all up there. But in addition to that, so the legislation specifically requested that they be posted between 7,500 and 50,000. Now, it would not be feasible for us to go back and try to assemble all the pieces and parts for contracts over 50,000. But with the process that we're trying to put in place, we're hoping that going forward, we'll be able to place those above 50,000 on the website, because I suspect that that's what council's intention was, even though that was not in the legislation, so that there would be more visibility into that.
And if I may, so at our last finance committee meeting, we had about 5 contracts roughly posted on the website. As of today, we have double that, we have 10. And we have another 11 that's in queue for laws redaction review. So it goes, that's the final step before it gets posted to the website. And then from that list, so that's 11 of those are from the November tranche that we sent over to comms. We learned that there were some signatures and we were pulling the pieces and parts together. We have about 2 from the old list that we're still working on to get updated. That will be done hopefully within the next week or so. And then we're moving forward to like the recent, so we have about 5 that we're working on that's from the recent contract listing from November through current.
But just to reiterate, those contracts where we're going back and putting them together, that is very labor intensive because there wasn't a good process in place. And so again, it would not be feasible for us to do that, go back and do that for all the contracts over 50,000. But we're hoping that we'll have a good, durable process in place to make that easier going forward.
Is it helpful if you would just start like at January 1 and just go from there? I mean, how far back are you going?
Well, we went back till June whenever the legislation was passed. So that's what we've been chipping away at, the contracts between June and end of year. Those are the ones where they're pulling pieces and parts together and putting them onto the website. So as Rashawn said, we've been working on this for a while and we have 10 contracts posted. And so going forward, we're hoping that in the near future, we'll have a process in place so that, it isn't as time intensive. There is, as of today, there is no central repository for contracts in the city.
But simply answering your question, absolutely. If we just had to go from January. But the problem is, to the mayor's point, it was scattered everywhere. And it's 6 months of scattering everywhere. So unfortunately, that's what's taking the time.
So does it make sense? Okay, so I know the spirit of the contract was to go back to the June, July timeframe of last year. And many of the people in this room wanted that legislation to be passed. Does it make sense to relax the legislation? Or is there no?
I don't think that it's necessary because we're going to be done soon with those contracts from June through the end of the year.
Okay.
If you were to ask for the contracts above 50,000, that would not be feasible for us to come up with the time to do. But going forward, I think that assuming that we have a process in place over the next month, something that we've been working on for a while, I think that from that point going forward, it'll be a lot easier for staff to get a contract, send it to law for redaction, get it posted to the website in a way that they can't do today.
That seems fair.
The intent for us was visibility of those contracts that council was not even seeing at all, so that's why we did that delineation in legislation, so if you start to doing the bigger ones, because your process is in place, that's extra frosting on the cake. I do, because I've talked to Jessica Shantz, I've talked to Addie about these contracts, and even I think you've already made progress on the process because you've already got the contract from Chapo.
Yeah.
Posted up on the website, so there has to have been progress made on the process, so thank you,
Absolutely, yeah.
thank you. And also for the public, if you wanna go and see these contracts, all you have to do is type in contracts into the search box and the page will pop up. It's very user friendly.
And this is like a whole group effort. Tiffany and
Yes.
Rashawn are a part of this.
Yeah.
We've been meeting weekly so that we can make sure that there's forward progress.
Thank you.
And like I said, I'm hoping that maybe over the next month, we'll have that long-term process in place.
Thank you.
Well, nice job. Moving on to the next item, a discussion of policy for funding requests. Councilwoman Jessica Cohn volunteered to put together some legal work or just some thoughts on the matter. You've shared that with council. We haven't had a chance to talk about it.
And I'll add, so thankfully I just got my city computer, but I didn't bring my personal one, so I'm working off my phone, but this is something that Councilman DeWitt Foy and I talked about because it is related to the $150,000 city event fund that sits in the Parks and Rec part of the budget. And the draft that I sent out to council, of course, which we did not talk about, but I just sent it out for review, is this was based on President Kuda's, the discussion we had, and President Kuda's request that we get some draft parameters out for discussion. And so, we can, just to summarize for the public what this document suggests or proposes is funding should be capped at $5,000 per event, would only be given to nonprofit entities, and that would be federal or state recognized nonprofit entities. We talked at the meeting, and that's what I summarized here, was funding may only be provided for event co-sponsorships. And to narrow that down even more, they must take place within the geographic boundaries of Cleveland Heights and be open to the entire public, and also provide a clear and direct benefit to the Cleveland Heights community. And that was around this idea of public purpose that we've heard a lot from our law department about when it comes to discretionary funds. There's a list in there of ineligible uses, private or invitation-only events, political campaigns or partisan activities, religious services, ongoing, and this is where we talked about it and we can, discuss more, ongoing operational expenses or programmatic expenses unrelated to a specific event and not to be used for capital improvements or equipment. And then, in the document, and this would be like for dissemination, would be a checklist for organizations that they could use to say, are we eligible, are we not? And then I think the other big question around this draft application process is who is making the final decision? And Councilman DeWitt Foy and I discussed this a little bit because there's a question of whether council just allocates the funds for the budget, like appropriates a certain amount within a fund, and then the administration takes these requests, reviews them, and subsequently approves them, or if council appropriates the money in a designated fund and then does the review and approval. I think the consensus between the two of us is that we would be okay with council just appropriating the funds and having that be an administrative function. We can certainly get the mayor's perspective on that as well. And then the only other, I think, important piece is that I don't believe we've done any sort of post-event reporting from nonprofit.
We've tried.
Right. So, but that would be something, an expectation we could lay out, as a condition of the funding. So I guess I'll stop there. Is there anything that you wanted to add?
I would just add to the point you made about whether this is administrative or council. This stands out to me as, I believe, the only as an outlier, and the only thing that council routinely does where we're allocating additional funds outside of the budget on a request basis. So if we know that we have $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 in expected expenditures, and we budget that, and then we outline an administrative purpose according to these parameters that we've agreed on, then I would be in favor of moving this towards a more administrative approval process.
So one suggestion about getting the final reports is, I know in the state and city arts council in Columbus, you have to submit the final report to get paid. So that could be your incentive for them to get their reports in, that if it matters, that's an important factor.
And then just one more point to clarify, council allocated $150,000 for city-led community events. And then this is referring to the discretionary council budget for typically for requests from community organizations. So we're looking at the Happy Heights run. Well, actually not that one, because that is going to be more of a city-led event. Tiger 5K, Music Hop, and other such.
And just again, refreshing our collective memories, we believe that there's $20,000 sitting in the council fund, right? So that would be what we have for this year, but this would inform our budget process for next year. We would have, again, the Parks and Rec Community City-led events fund, and then we would consider how much we would want to put in the council sponsorship fund, let's call it, for argument's sake.
So it's pretty simple, I think, because we have kind of a longish list of events that we sponsor. And there's also our communications department that works on that opportunity too, because they're very much involved in these requests. I mean, these are events. You know, Future Heights recently came to us with sort of a soft ask so that they can extend their event by another, I think they were looking for another 30,000.
Exceeds the council budget line item.
Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be a point where I think we need to act on that soft request. We also have people that have come to us in the past, and we have made funding, made a $100,000 fund on one item. We funded a merchant association twice. We've funded some work sort of outside. I think it was outside. Was it outside the budget, the arts for Noble, or did we add that back in? The murals.
I can't recall whether we budgeted that. I think
I
we
think you
did.
added that
Yes,
in at the
yes,
end, yes.
I guess what I'm concerned about is we have these requests that are coming up, and when I hear the fact that we're not struggling right now, we're trying to stay on top of some of these additional expenses, and I believe we've had some anecdotal conversations about where there's even additional funds, but surprise budget items, I mean surprise costs. I guess I'm concerned, I mean, do we wanna like put a stake in the sand and say, okay, well, we're only gonna be doing these smallish events, these 5,000 events, the ones that we typically do? Are we at a point where we can increase some of those? And how do we go about doing that? We even have some bigger multi-$100,000 requests that have shown up recently.
I mean, I'll speak for myself, is that the draft that which by the way, I should say was built, also aligned very well with something that Gail and Addie, Vice President Larson and Addie had put together, I think last year, that was sent to me as well. I will say for myself, I think that this is the way to go to level set expectations about what discretionary funding the city has. Another reminder is that we do have CDBG funds that are an open application process for non-profits to apply for programmatic funds that are specifically within the guidelines of the HUD funding, and those are larger amounts. And so I feel like this is a good way to not only level set expectations, but set out a process that will guide us, throughout the year and almost take out the consternation of who do we fund and when of the year. And by the way, this is also, I believe in this document that I sent, we can talk about that request has to be done 30 days ahead or 90 days ahead, or if we're only taking requests in the fall, maybe we only take requests in September for the coming year, so we can consider how we budget that in. And again, more certainty, more financial certainty, more certainty for the nonprofits that are thinking about this money. And I think better messaging from the city as to where we want to direct our funds and where we can't due to budgetary limitations.
Two thoughts. First of all, I think this is important that we put it in place. And we do it as soon as possible because the requests have come to us directly as council members. We will get them as well. That the outline is here for what our expectations are, right? I do think that we need to base it, the question is asked on number 6, disbursement of funds. I believe that needs to be on reimbursement eligible rather than on giving them the money. That's my opinion. Because they should be submitting a budget anyway, but maybe you don't spend it on balloons, you decide to back off on that or whatever. Then you end up getting money back. So I think it needs to be based on receipts. And I like Councillor Stone's idea about it's tied to getting that report.
I would also say the pool is $20,000, is that right? Yeah, so I think your idea of a single grant deadline and have everybody line up, and then you can decide, you have the whole grant docket in front of you and you could decide what is the most important thing. And it's fairer, I think, to the applicants, and so it's not first come, first served.
We have some events that are sort of, if we all of a sudden said, okay, well, we're gonna open this up in the fall, but then some people wanna know that they have the funding now for that event in the fall, we're gonna have to either ease our way into this or, maybe have 2 dates where we accept these.
I personally think that this should be for next year, but we need to allocate the 20,000 we have for this year. So we can use this framework to figure out this year and then start the formal process how we'd like to do it for the.
Make sure everybody knows.
So I could suggest just connecting with the groups that have reached out in the past and that we expect to hear from this year or already have, and communicating that this is a new process and setting a date. We could call it, sometime in March, that we have clarity to work forward this year, and then repeating that process starting in the fall for each subsequent year, so that we know what to account for in the budget.
That's a great idea.
Some of these organizations may also not have a checking account. I mean, they are kind of they do this kind of at one time. They need the monies upfront to advance. So we're basically funding kind of on a budget versus funding on an actual receipt. But we want to see the receipts.
Is that the case? I don't know. From years prior?
I almost think that
It's not feasible.
I'm not sure it's feasible, but I think it's a question that we need to ask. I'm writing a note to see, checking in with Addie.
I mean, another way to do it is to say you're ineligible for funding unless you file your previous year's annual report, final report. So if you wanted to advance some of the funds, say, when next year rolls around, if you don't have a final report, you're not eligible for funding. That would solve that problem.
That's actually a good idea to actually put in there, because I don't think we've ever had a problem with people. I mean, we've always told them we wanted to have some kind of update at the end. And I think they've either had a one-off conversation with the council president or council leadership, or they've come up here to council meeting hall. I mean, I think everybody's tried, but it hasn't, sometimes it's fallen through the cracks. But I mean, having a written report by the end of the year, if you don't submit one, you're not gonna get your funding the next year. If that's what you have, I think that's a great idea.
The most recent money that we authorized was for the Winterfest on Coventry, and we did base that on reimbursement for receipts submitted. They were able to handle that, so. Do you know some of those other organizations that couldn't wait to get their money until after the event's over?
I think the only one and President Kuda would know better than this is the music hop people. Are they putting that money out ahead of time to pay for the groups? That I don't know, but the other organizations, I think that they've got the funding to put it on, and they're looking to us to help reimburse some of their costs that they incurred. So they've got more left to donate.
I keep on settling, thinking about the music hop and their request. Should we ask the administration to look into the request and give it some thought?
I would encourage you to talk to President Kuda first, because he has been communicating with Future Heights
Okay,
about the request.
okay. That's fair enough.
And I had started collecting some of this information through the Parks and Rec Committee, so I can look back on getting a clear understanding of all of the organizations that have requested in the past and what, if they're planning on doing that again this year and at what amount to start this process. So I can have that information and share with council the next week or so.
Okay, you can probably ask Gaddy to help with that too, I presume.
And I'll clean up this document that I had sent around with this, based on this conversation, and we can recirculate.
So with this document that you're referring to, would it be a piece of legislation or would it be like policy, or how would we wanna deal with that? So are we kind of encroaching on the administrations? I mean, do we have
Wish
council
we had the law
policies?
department here to opine, but they did not stay. I think that's, maybe I'll take that on to ask the law department for their opinion on how do we formalize this. And I'll send them, we once we agree on the draft, and then we can ask them how to formalize it.
So what do we do about some of the pending $100,000 or plus $100,000? I mean, I'll use one, the immigration group. You know, they're looking for $200,000 to $300,000, and we have a next meeting that we think a lot of that can be solved by nonprofit money. I mean, do we wanna have a policy where, knowing that there's some possible budget shortfalls, that at this time, we're really not, I mean, we just don't have the budget to spend any extra money until we get a better sense of where we are with your investigation on what we're able to do with our budget. To make some adjustments to cover some of these unexpected expenditures. Or should we delay this conversation until next month?
So my thought is, and take it or leave it, my thought is that we should not put a form on the website. I think that it becomes a slippery slope for co-sponsorships. I think that we're going to be inundated with requests, and I just don't think that it's something that we should wade into. If council wants to do that, that's certainly fine. We can make it happen. With regard to other outstanding requests, there's nothing saying that you have to act on them. So maybe consider sending a kind email in response to some of the folks, but it's not necessarily necessary that you do something regarding them.
I wasn't thinking of putting an application up for anything at all.
Okay,
I mean, because that's not really the scope of what we do.
I'm sorry. I thought that was my impression of where we were moving with the 20,000. I apologize for misunderstanding.
I think just to clarify on that, I think the idea is to understand what organizations have already been funded in that way that would fit this framework. And then personally, but not personally, I guess, as a council, invite them, ask them, are you seeking funding again? And if so, this is the new framework.
Okay.
And then if you meet all of these requirements, then, we can move forward within our $20,000 budget. And I think the same for September or August or wherever we want to do it for the coming year, is that you can certainly express interest if you check all the boxes on our framework, and then we have to go from there.
I think the benefit of this is having just clear objective criteria with which we make a decision, whether that be council or if this does move over to an administrative approval. but not necessarily an application.
And just speaking from the financial side of the table, going back to your point, until we could figure out, like the mayor said, on what we have that we know we're gonna have to pay, that is clearly right now unbudgeted. And given the fact, at least from my experience of, we now sit here being a committee that lost its bond rating. And knowing that the next time we're gonna borrow debt, we have to go back to Moody's and demonstrate fiscal responsibility. I just think the stars don't line up or the timing lines up where we're potentially gonna look at, and I don't know the specifically what you're talking about, but potentially spending $200,000 or $300,000 on something that one is completely unbudgeted for right now, until we get that bond rating up. Because just like and I think what the mayor's point was, you put something out on a website, even though thank God we're not going to, everybody's gonna come out, and now you're gonna sit with 150 requests. And how is this one rated slightly higher than this one? It could become a nightmare for you guys.
And I Director Brzezinski, I think the conversation we had last month's meeting was that we specifically do not want to become a grant
Oh, sure.
maker. We are not, and if anything, I think that having this framework is helpful in narrowing
Oh, it's
what the
perfect.
expectations are in terms of the city, because we, as Councilman Cobb, I think, said at the last meeting, we're just not open for $100,000 plus requests on a regular basis, and that's really a difficult place to be in.
Absolutely.
And I think what happened with that $100,000 that we had to come at us last year, the legislation was written and it was like, there was almost an obligation on our part to fund it, and that's not, it should have been, that was backwards, right? It should have come to the council first as a request, and then had that party, if it was the council agreed to consider, then there would have been, what are you using the money for? And we, then we would be looking to the finance department to say, do we even have these funds available? We didn't get to have those conversations. So.
Well, I think the whole concept of waiting until we have a bond rating before we start to even consider some of these other items that are crossing our desk, I think makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's still, I think, a lot of stuff we just don't know. The audits aren't done. I think we need to be a little bit more frugal right now, and we're finding out some of the, it's only January, but when you sort of look at sort of a little bit of a leading indicator on the financial statements that we saw today, I think we need to be careful. We're still have to get a better idea of where we are with all the personnel expenses that, it's a higher number than what was expected. And I think it's important for us to sort of echo this, maybe in the committee meeting of a whole or next one. Maybe talk a little bit more about it, just to make sure all of us are sort of on this path of, we need to be a little bit more frugal now, as opposed to trying to take on more things.
Do people feel strongly whether this should be a council decision or an administrative approval following the guideline? Obviously, it would be a council allocation.
I think the guideline needs to come up to council, everybody. I think we need to make sure we've got President Kuda here to make sure he's on board. We have almost all the council here in this room, but I really think it's a council decision.
Agreed.
Do you, just to clarify, you mean how the funds get allocated?
How the funds get allocated, but also I think the policy nature of what you're working on, I think we all need to be on board with that. And then I think the second thing that we're talking about is any bigger things that are out there. We're sort of in a frugal mode right now until we can get a bond rating and get a better handle on our finances. I mean, we've got great people right now helping us figure this out. I think we need to figure out before we possibly overextend ourselves anymore.
Do we wanna move this out of committee tonight to complete council, to committee of the whole, or do you wanna come back to the finance committee next month with the revisions, or?
It'll take a few minutes, I mean, it won't take long, and I think you have almost all of the information you need.
Yeah, I wanna take another shot at it, but I wanna make sure we have everyone.
Maybe 2 committees of the whole, not
I
next
can
Monday,
definitely get it by next committee of the whole if we have time.
The third?
or the 3rd, okay.
Is it for your agenda or you wanna?
Probably not. It would-
That's why I was saying for the one after.
Thank you for the grace, I appreciate it. So it'll be the second meeting,
Okay.
council meeting in March.
I can share the numbers before then, but then have the discussion at the committee of the whole.
We are really running close to time here. We had a 2026 committee priorities and planning discussion. I don't know if anybody has come with items. I happen to have 2. Has anybody thought about things that they wanna be, having on our agenda for next or for this year?
I just wanna continue to see the financials and the audits results coming forward, and I would like to have, if possible, the auditor share in a meeting with us, either at the finance committee or committee of the whole, the results of 2023 audit, if it's possible, if they would be amenable to that, or Azuka would come in to present the results of the 2023 audit.
We could certainly look into it,
And it would be mid-March.
because if it becomes the state, it's my experience, they'll do that during business hours and probably via Zoom.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, it's something to work on anyway. Thank you. That would be mine.
That could be done and we could just notice a special meeting. And
Right.
pretty easily. I have 2 kind of quick items I'm just gonna throw out there. We may not have time to really discuss it. I'm kind of hoping that we'd be able to get a reaction from our finance department about these. So maybe these are things that can get discussed in our next meeting. But the first item is get a better understanding of what each fund is. I mean, we have about 100 funds here. And there's never really been a good explainer to council, or at least while I was on council, on the purpose of the fund, the source of the source of the monies for the fund. We can't go through all of them in one meeting, we're all gonna fall asleep. I mean, there's just too much out there.
Finance might not fall asleep.
Finance is on there.
It excites us.
I'm thinking of maybe, taking maybe 20 funds, a digestible number.
Sure.
And maybe starting from the top and going down. And just say, okay, well, fund 203, First Suburbs Consortium. This is the kind of money in that, this is where we're going. I know there was some discussion, Director, where you thought that there might be too many funds and you may wanna like smash some of the funds together. At some
Oh, there's no question.
It's an
Now-
accounting term.
No, but on some of them, to actually get them to go away, I mean, we might ultimately decide as a group to get them to go away. We might have to go to the Court of Common Pleas, just that's because that's state law. But you're right, I mean, just quickly looking, we have got a fund with $71 in it. I would start by looking at what kind of activity we've had in that fund, if we haven't had activity in a while. Who knows, we're able to figure out why we had that fund, and if not, we could certainly put it on a list, and if we need to go to Court of Common Pleas, we will.
Okay. Well, I think it would be helpful starting next meeting if we can just at your discretion, a certain number, I'm throwing 20 out there, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 30, I don't know, whatever you think is, I'd like to get on a plan where we have a good explanation of what each fund is and get that out there publicly while the camera's on.
We could probably do 20.
Okay.
But I better not see you sleep.
I like the stuff as much as you like it.
Alright.
The other item is P&Ls, profit and loss statements, for various aspects of what we do as a city. And it's something I'm hopeful that the new administration would be agreeable to. And just start targeting target a few areas within our city and how it functions. I mean, the biggest and the easiest is probably Kane Park. How's Kane Park running? What are the revenues, what are the expenses? I know we subsidize a lot of these things, and so we know that, that's part of our budget. But you can look at this from other things too. And I'm not trying to focus on things in the Parks and Recs department, but it's the only thing on the top of my head. Look at Cumberland Pool. Really, what are our expenses for Cumberland Pool? What are the revenues that we get in from Cumberland Pool? We're likely gonna be making a Cumberland Pool decision in the next couple months. So maybe if we can figure out a couple areas where we can get some more, plan on getting more detailed financials on different aspects of what we do. And, not for everything within sort of this Cleveland Heights empire. But are there just like maybe a half a dozen or a dozen items that we could help our departments figure out, really what are our costs? I'm not sure you take snowplow, if that makes any sense. I mean, what does it cost for us to plow the streets?
Community center is a good one.
Yeah,
Cost center.
Yeah.
Cost centers, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Kane Park, that's a good one.
Yeah.
We've already started meeting with Kane Park.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is, she's, and obviously I haven't worked with her because she just started.
Mhm.
But she is very detail oriented on the financial side and is already putting things in place.
Good.
Which is good.
sounds good.
One,
Yes.
debt. We don't have to do it next finance committee meeting, but we got sent a spreadsheet, I think when we were first sworn in, of like what debt, Rachel and Director Caldwell followed up with that, but I would love to understand better, what's our annual debt service, what,
We could direct you to the pages that are listed in our financial statements.
I-
For starters, but depending on when the debt started, the good news is most of the debt for the city will be rolling off by 2030.
that, I think more than just like the statements, is that sort of just putting it into context
Right.
for us, yeah.
Oh yeah, in our
That'd be
notes in
really
the financial statements, I'll be able to pull it out. But specifically, if it's debt that's 17 years old, I might be able to find somebody to say, what specifically was this for? We'll go through the transcripts to see if we could figure out specifically what it was for. But we'll get you more information than you currently got, sure.
That'd be great.
One
yes,
quick
go.
one, I'd also like updates when you have them on the process of seeking a new financial software for your department. Just updates when you get a chance.
Correct.
Thank you. Anything else before we adjourn? Okay, let's adjourn this meeting. Thank you.